Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take some time today to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, just in case you missed it, you might like to know that Senator Rand Paul, he just released his annual Festivus report in which he cites more than $1 trillion in government waste throughout 2024. Seeing how the national debt increased by $2 trillion in 2024 to the current figure of $36 trillion, well, I must insist that the government actually spent $2 trillion more than was necessary. And hey, what's $1 trillion between political leaders who don't seem to mind the fact that they're destroying our nation's economy? Well, with all this in mind, let's consider some of the things that Senator Rand Paul listed in this latest Festivus report. For example, the Department of the Interior spent $12 million last year on a Las Vegas pickleball complex. Now, remember, our nation is currently in debt to the tune of $36 trillion, which included an $892 billion interest payment in fiscal year 2024. And yet the Department of the Interior thinks that this is the right time to spend $12 million of taxpayer dollars on Las Vegas pickleball complex so that we can go have some fun, right? Everyone involved in that decision ought to be fired immediately. And listen, if that's not bad enough, the Department of Energy, they spent $15.5 billion last year in an attempt to incentivize Americans to purchase electric vehicles that, most of us either don't want or can't afford. According to a recent Gallup poll, 48% of respondents would not even consider buying an electric vehicle. And a McKinsey report has also revealed that 46% of Americans who now own an electric vehicle are very likely to go back to gas-powered vehicles at the time of their next purchase. Both Ford and General Motors have lost billions and billions of dollars on their electric vehicle program, and one reason why is because people either don't want them or they can't afford them. And what this means is that the Department of Energy wasted more than $15 billion last year in their attempts to incentivize the sales of these electric vehicles. And well, I can't wait to see how much they plan to spend on the bailouts when, American car companies who are too big to fail. The Department of State also spent $2.1 million last year for border security in Paraguay. And just to be clear, Paraguay is not on the border of the USA. No, Paraguay is landlocked. It's a landlocked country between Argentina, Bolivia, and Brazil. They're in Central South America. It's a swampland of subtropical forest that's more than 4,000 miles away from our southern border. And while Biden's border policies have effectively allowed illegal migrants to invade the USA over the past 4 years and en masse, the Department of State spent more than $2 million in 2024 just on border security in Paraguay. The Department of Agriculture has spent $20 million on this program. It's called the Fertilize Right Initiative, and they've been using this to advance the use of fertilizer in Pakistan, Vietnam, Colombia, and Brazil. That's right. Our nation, which is overdrawn by $36 trillion, has no problem spending $20 million last year teaching people overseas how to use fertilizer. This is just absolutely insane. You might also like to know that the Department of State spent $3 million for girl-centered climate action in Brazil. You might be wondering, what in the world is girl-centered climate action? Well, this is something that we need to address in Brazil because, we need to spend $3 million in order to help girls become activists regarding climate change. And the reason they give is because climate change has a disproportionate impact on women and girls, and particularly in vulnerable communities like in Brazil. And it's for this reason that the Department of State, which is responsible for our country's foreign policy and relations, they decide to spend $3 million of money we don't have to help girls in Brazil to understand how they can become activists who are speaking out against climate change. And yeah, despite the fact that, there are many scientists who insist that there is no climate emergency. Well, this didn't stop the National Endowment for the Arts from awarding the Bearded Ladies Cabaret a $10,000 grant to support a cabaret show on ice skates, which is focused on climate change. That's right. Our government gave $19,000 to drag queens so that they could create a cabaret show on ice that focuses on climate change. The National Endowment for the Arts also spent $365,000 to promote circuses in city parks because, listen, When it comes to the collapse of our economy, there's nothing like a free circus in the park to distract the masses. The Agency for International Development is now spending $20 million on Alan Sim Sim, which is a new Sesame Street style show in Iraq. Well, you might be wondering, why is our government interested in spending millions of dollars on children's television in Iraq? Well, it's because, we have a government that's no longer accountable to we the people. The Department of Health and Human Services has allocated $2 million to research. They're paying this money to a research team at New York University, and this team is investigating the influence of social media food advertising on the dietary choices of adolescents. Yeah, money well spent, I'm sure. The Department of State squandered more than $4 million on social media influencers. This included more than $15,000 on an influencer's event, and another $22,000 on a USAID social media influencers campaign. They also spent more than $100,000 in order to teach youth in Kyrgyzstan on how to go viral. and all of this at a time when many Americans are struggling to afford food. You might also like to know that Congress spent $15 million in order to turn the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, into an unconstitutional force to prepare, file, and audit your hard-earned money. And when the Biden administration passed the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, they managed to slip this $15 million in for a task force whose purpose is to turn the IRS into an armed force of agents who are here to make sure that every American is paying every dollar of their taxes. Listen, I'm all for paying taxes, in order to provide our population with a police force and fire department and border security. And I realize we all need to chip in to pay for roads and parks and these sorts of amenities. And yet, as we consider how the national debt increased by $2 trillion in 2024, well, there should be no doubt that our government is filled with people who are abusing their position, they're abusing their power, they're spending money we do not have on things we do not need. That being the case, we ought to be praying. We need to pray that Trump's Department of Government Efficiency will come in and clean house. And while I realize that the government will always carry some level of debt in order to operate, there should be no doubt that this increase of $2 trillion within a single year, it should be reason enough for us to start slashing budgets and shutting down unnecessary offices where power-hungry people are spending money we don't have on things that we don't need. And as we consider the current state of our nation, I can't help but to remember something that King Solomon wrote in Proverbs 29. It's verse 2 where he declares, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan." That's right. When evil people run our government, the people groan. And as we consider the ever-increasing national debt, I have no doubt that we're all groaning. As we consider the current inflation rate, I have no doubt we are all groaning. Now, to put a finer tip on my point here, it'll help you to know that when we divide up the national debt per person, every individual American citizen effectively owes the government $107,000. And the reason why is because we have representatives who have no problem spending money we don't have on things we don't need. And with that being the case, we need to be praying for righteous rulers who are able to shut down all of these programs that are driving our nation to the brink of insolvency. And at the same time, I also encourage every Christian to lead by example. We need to lead by example when it comes to our own debt. We need to flee from the idolatry of covetousness. I like the way that Paul put it in Colossians chapter 3. It's verse 5 where he declares, "Put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." You might not know this, but covetousness is idolatry. Covetousness is a desire to acquire the wealth of this world. And it's a form of idolatry that will lead us to ruin. And with that being the case, I encourage every Christian to flee from the idolatry of covetousness. And let's do that by learning how to be content with the perfect provision of the Lord. In this way, the Lord will help us to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.